I love an RPG. Any RPG, whatever type, I'll give it a try. I've enjoyed every side of the spectrum, between the Skyrims, the Pokemons, the Fire Emblems, and the Dark Souls. However, I've always been drawn to what could be described as a JRPG, as negative as that term has been in history. The likes of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Shin Megami Tensei, I can't get enough of them. But there's one series I always thought deserved a little bit more of the spotlight, the Tales series. Now, don't get me wrong, I acknowledge that it has definitely had its moments. Many people still tout Tales of Symphonia as their favourite game of all time, which is a statement that I can absolutely see the reasons behind. Around about the time I was writing up my last video, Tales of Arise Beyond the Dawn was announced. Now, I haven't played Arise yet myself, although I have seen some very mixed reactions to it, but this announcement reinvigorated my interest in the series. It had been a while since I last replayed Symphonia, and a couple of years since I finished Berseria, which was incredible, I might add. So what better way than to go back to the very beginning, right back to 1995, with Tales of Phantasia, the one that started it all. For this video we'll be looking at the PS1 version, since it has additional content added from the original SNES version, including an additional party member. I briefly considered trying the GBA version since it was the only one officially released outside of Japan, but I've been told the sprites are squashed, the game just generally looks bad, and the soundtrack is horribly compressed, so we'll be ignoring that one. Please also be aware that I will try to hold off on major spoilers for the beginning of the video. I will mention things like playable characters and things throughout, so be mindful of that. I will mention before I get into major story stuff, so with all of that out of the way, let's get into it. Let's start out with the basics. You play as Cress Albion, a young man from Totus Village. Side note, the Tales wiki says that the village is called Toltus, which is not in the translation I used, so there might be a slight disconnect with names here and there. Anyway, this is also the perfect opportunity to say, yet again, fandom has proven to be a completely non-functional website. Thank you, I hate this. And he's living a perfectly normal life until one day, while he's out hunting with his friend Chester Barklight, he sees a spirit emerge from the trunk of a long-deceased tree, before returning home to find everyone he knew and loved has been murdered by mysterious Black Knights. They were searching for his father's pendant, which Cress himself has been carrying since his 15th birthday. Enraged, he sets out on a journey of vengeance, leading him to run into various other eccentric characters and take part in a battle that is much bigger than he ever expected. It's all very standard beginning of a journey stuff. It's very typical for a protagonist in a game like this to either be an orphan or become one at the beginning of the game. Although I don't really think it's fair to compare this game to tropes and archetypes we can identify with now, since this was the era in which they were still being established in video game form. I know the medium of storytelling is obviously a lot older than 1995, but still, it's the beginning of the series. I don't think we should roll our eyes at an orphan protagonist until like Hubert from Grace's losing his parents by being sold to a neighbouring country. Not that tropes are bad anyway, I think we should embrace tropes a little bit more. There's a reason they show up in so many stories, it's because these things work. Anyway, slightly off topic, let's get back to the topic at hand. The game plays out in a mostly linear way from here on out, although there are several points at which you can clear main story points in any order you want. Although there is a difference in difficulty between them, especially in the first instance. At a certain point in the game, you have to find 3 summon spirits. Undine, yes, that's how later games say it, that's how I'll be saying it, thank you. Gnome, and Ifrit, before heading to another central dungeon, which the game presents as a 4th choice, but in actuality you have to go there last. You have free choice to go to them in any order. In my case, I went to Ifrit first, which proved to be the wrong choice, as it was actually the most difficult of the 3, leading to even the basic mobs in the dungeon giving me a lot of trouble. After a lengthy grind, I beat the dungeon, only to go to Undine after to literally steamroll the entire place, with Gnome not being overly difficult either. I'll mention the other split path later since it's towards the end of the game. It is nice to have the choice in these things after all, although later games in the series would expand on this, particularly in the case of Symphonia, a game which has a lot more in common with Phantasia lore-wise than I once thought. Now, since this is an RPG from the 90s, as you move through this world on the lovely 3D world map exclusive to this version, you'll run into random encounters, and honestly I think the encounter rate here is actually not too bad. The only time I truly felt it was too much was in later dungeons when I was struggling with certain puzzles, but that was mainly due to impatience with the mechanics and also my lack of brain power. The developers described the battle system as the linear motion battle system. Both your party and the enemies lie on a 2D plane, with the player being able to move from side to side. Physical attacks have specific ranges associated with each ability. Attacks such as Demon Fang can be used from a distance, while others such as Tiger Fang require Crest to be up close and personal. I did find that sometimes using a close range ability, while at long range meant Crest would run up to the enemy before using it, but I found this to be a little bit inconsistent, which honestly is my main issue with the battle system. Controlling it felt inconsistent. For context, I played the entire game controlling Crest, and while yes, you can control others using specific accessories, I chose not to, as by this stage I had gotten used to Crest's controls. The control scheme to begin with is in semi-auto mode, which boils down to when you press the attack button, your character will run up to the enemy, but my issue is that when they finish their combo or ability, Crest will run back towards the party. I find that holding the directional button towards the enemy kept him in place sometimes, but not all the time. It's frustrating to do the same action exactly the same multiple times and receive multiple different results. Later on you do get the option to use manual mode, which does improve on this, but the actual bane of my life was the flying enemies, especially those stupid, disgusting bee hornet wasp creatures. My god, from their minuscule hitbox to the issues in getting Crest to actually attack above him sometimes, these things would have decimated me if they actually did any damage. The majority of other characters are either mages or ranged attackers, so this issue really only affects Crest, but as the main character I feel like this was something I wanted to mention. Honestly, Crest's real role in battle isn't even to deal damage. Your real goal is to distract and stun enemies so that the others can cast their spells. Since towards the end of the game, Crest's abilities were doing about 1,000 or 2,000 damage, while Klaus was doing about 4,000, with Arch approaching 6,000 if the enemies were arranged right. Speaking of spells, Klaus uses summons in battle, both single and multiple target, with more being picked up throughout the main story with some optional ones at the end. Honestly, when you first get Klaus, he's kind of useless. He comes with 0 summons, and even after you get Sylph, it takes a while before you get any more, although by the end of the game he can deal insane amounts of damage. Arch is our spellcaster, who floats around on a broom and can use various spells of different elements and intensities. These must be learned from spellbooks, which are either purchased from specific NPCs or found in chests. From memory, she only gets about 1 from the story progression. The main thing I want to mention is that when either a summon or a high level spell is cast, the action will pause while the animation plays. I completely understand that this is due to hardware limitations, since if 3 or 4 of these played at once, your PlayStation would literally explode. But when this is all your party is casting, this can make the action very stop and start, making it hard to get into a groove with Crest, especially if you were guarding for an attack that was about to hit him, since after the action resumes, it's very likely you're going to get hit, regardless of your inputs. While we're on the topic of abilities, Crest also has access to special abilities, or Ogi, which can be purchased from NPCs. These are special skills that involve 2 separate abilities and are quite powerful, but they can only be used once the 2 abilities have been mastered, which means that they have to be used quite a lot in battles. Unfortunately, this meant I only ever used 1 Ogi in my entire playthrough, since I tend to find a group of skills I like and then stick with them. Claw Slash was a great skill though. But what about outside of battles? What about the rest of the gameplay? The rest of your time is spent either traversing towns or dungeons. The various towns aren't huge, and the only one I ever had the slightest difficulty going around was Euclid, and that's just because it was the first large town in the game, and also the clown in the centre had a vile aura around it, and I'm not about to let that into my life. The dungeons are a mixed bag for me. Some of them, like the ones that you find the summons in I mentioned earlier, feel like just the right length. The puzzles make sense for the most part, and the whole experience is quite nice. The issue is the rest just feel either that little bit too long, or the puzzles aren't intuitive, or they have too many steps. Each dungeon does have its own puzzles, which is greatly appreciated. One such example of a good one is the Gnome Cave. Here you have to escort this small creature through the passageways, avoiding other hostile little men before bringing him to a group of his friends, who will clear the way. This puzzle only lasts a few screens and it isn't overly complicated. It's still something you have to put a bit of effort into, of course, but it is enjoyable. Somewhere I think had a bad puzzle would be the Tower of the Zodiac. Here, a plaque will ask you for a specific song, but only using a vague adjective like a brave song or a dark song, and you need to examine various statues throughout the floor, which isn't small, and decide which one matches the description best. And then the song will play until you choose another or exit the floor. And some of these songs are horrific. I will admit the game has an overall good soundtrack, but these tracks are grating on the ears. And you have to do this puzzle 4 times. Granted, by the end, a lot of the guesswork is removed by a process of elimination, but still, 3 times would have been enough. On the other hand, you also have dungeons that are just mazes with no clear direction at all. The Drained Forest has multiple places you can reach within its winding paths, and I understand it's supposed to be confusing, but I could not bring myself to do that without a map more than once, especially when you don't even have a general direction to move towards. The Valhalla Plains also had this issue, but I thought moving towards the general cardinal direction you wanted to reach made this one a little easier. Not that I'm sure it really worked, but hey, I did it twice and I got what I wanted, so I'm giving the game points for that. Now is as good a time as any to mention the world map. In this version, the map is a 3D environment that can be freely traversed, while previously it was a 2D plane. It functions similarly to later entries such as that from Symphonia, and honestly I think it serves its purpose well. The vast majority of places you can enter are obvious. The only one I can't think of that isn't immediately obvious is the Forest of Spirits from the beginning of the game, but that one gets a pass since the game will literally not let you go anywhere else before entering there. Also, while on the world map, if you press select, you will get a skit, or a conversation between your party members, which is either main story related, which can serve as a reminder of what your current goals are, or it can be an unrelated conversation that helps establish party member relationships, or it's just a joke. Cress certainly does love his jokes. My only real issue with the skit system is that the game won't ever tell you when a new one is available. You just have to watch one every time you're back on the world map, which is something that would be fixed in later entries. Also, these are all fully voiced, which is interesting coming from games like The Abyss, which I always thought just didn't have voice skits, but turns out they're all voiced in Japanese, just not in the English dub. I understand that that's a lot of extra dialogue, but it's still kinda disappointing. I'm just glad they started dubbing them for later entries.
You're getting a little rough there, Sonny.
Your bones.
Right, now we're going to talk characters, so we'll be getting into the story a lot more, so spoilers are on the way. Our main character is Cress Albion. He's a swordsman, he loves a good pun, and he's out for revenge. Throughout the entirety of the game, he has this strong sense of justice, although at times I think his desire to defeat Daos, the enemy commander, cloud his thoughts at times. There's a particular scene towards the midpoint of the game, where Arch questions the motives of the enemy, not even trying to sympathise or anything, simply wanting to know what's going on, and Cress shuts her down after they witness a random monster kill someone, which, let's be frank, obviously that's not good. But a villain's motivation is something that you should attempt to understand, even in order to predict their next actions. Also, he has this cool red cape, so that has to count for something. Maybe that's what's making half of the women in this game fall in love with him. Technically, the next party member we meet is Chester Barclay, but he leaves the party for an extended period shortly after the raid on Totus Village, but he does come back later, although extremely underleveled. He lost his sister in the attack on the village, and he stays behind to bury the villagers, showing his deep love and appreciation for those around him, even in the face of danger. Later, when he joins back up and the rest of the party are about 30 to 40 levels above him, there are a couple of optional scenes you can view while resting at an inn, showing him training late into the night, either telling Cress about his feelings of inadequacy, or talking to Arch about feeling cheated out of revenge for his sister, since the people directly responsible for the attack have been defeated by Daos. He's fine. I just feel like he could have gained a lot from being a little more present in the plot, but obviously this isn't practical with the way things play out. Maybe he gets a little bit more in the various re-releases and remakes. Shortly after leaving Totus, Cress runs into his uncle in Euclid, and promptly gets betrayed and thrown in jail by the Black Knights led by Mars, but it's okay, because his uncle gets murdered off screen, so it's all good really. Here Cress hears a woman's voice that helps him leave his cell, only to find a corpse where he expected to find a friend. And in an honestly horrible sequence, he has to remove the long sword from her side in order to progress. In the next room he meets Mint Adonade, our next party member and dedicated healer. Now the translation I played with called her healing magic Methodism, which is apparently in reference to an ancient Greek school of medicine and not, in fact, the branch of Christianity like I thought. But it has also been officially translated as divine power, which does still make slight reference to a potential religious aspect, which you could definitely infer from Mint's clothing. As well as general healing, Mint also has access to various buffs and debuffs, which she never really seemed to want to use even when I had her AI set to support. Also actually, another thing about debuffs, there's no visual indicator for when a debuff either misses or doesn't affect an enemy, there's just nothing. A little miss indicator showing up would be nice. Mint doesn't have any offensive skills at all, but that does not stop her from running up to the enemy and whacking them with her rod. As a character, Mint is the typical healer archetype. She's soft-spoken and kind, and seems to have a crush on Cress, which she will never directly act on, but will stop others from making moves towards him. Now the one thing that really bothers me between Cress and Mint is the status of Mint's mother. Shortly after Cress frees Mint from her cell, she asks about her mother, who was in the next cell over. Obviously she's talking about the dead woman that we just passed, but Cress chooses not to tell her about her fate, simply stating that the cell was empty when he passed, and the game won't even let you approach that cell at all afterwards. Now in this moment, I understand. This was a tense situation and they needed to leave that place as soon as was possible, but Cress never tells her. There are plenty of opportunities throughout the story where he could have mentioned this fact. He even makes a grave in the Forest of Spirits, which was an area that had little to do with her. For Mint, sure, I guess maybe, because of the Yggdrasil being there, but her mother wasn't from there? You could interpret Mint's words in the cell as her understanding that which was not spoken out loud, and she even speaks with Cress about it towards the game's finale, but I really wish he had made the decision to tell her about it before at some stage. Maybe just after the party rejoins with Chester later in the game. Side note, I actually really enjoy that scene of them in Early Village. From the part of the opening scene and other dialogue at that time, you might expect it to be a love confession or something similar to that of the scenes in Flanoir in the epilogue of Symphonia, but instead it's two friends speaking on the death of a parent, something they share in common. I appreciate it for doing something different just before the final confrontation. After escaping from jail, Cress, Mint and Chester meet up with Trinix D. Morrison, a man who worked with Mint and Cress's parents in the past to seal away Daos, the evil demon king from 100 years in the past. He was sealed away using the two pendants that Cress and Mint once carried, the reason their parents were killed and that now lie in the hands of Mars, the Black Knight. The group travelled to the catacombs just in time to witness the unsealing of Daos, promptly before he disposes of his underlings with no sign of mercy or regret. The party proves no match for this great power, and Morrison prepares to send them away, before Chester charges in, unable to hold back his immense rage, leading to Cress and Mint leaving alone, leaving the fate of the remaining pair to be obliterated by Daos. Shortly after awakening, Cress and Mint enter a village neither of them recognise, and after witnessing the long-lost art of sorcery, and hearing of the lack of healing Methodism here, they realise they have actually been sent 100 years into the past, making this a story which takes place across time, a concept which has a lot of potential, split timelines, etc., and I think the developers definitely recognise this, shown by later developments when the party meets up with Morrison's ancestor, Edward D. Morrison, a man involved with the initial defeat of Daos in the past. During the plot, Morrison protects a child from harm by sacrificing himself to defeat a demon, therefore changing history, meaning the party would have to defeat Daos in his stead. Shortly after their trip into the past, the pair realizes they will need the power of sorcery in order to defeat Daos. This power was lost in the present times due to the world's supply of mana depleting due to unknown reasons that we will learn about later. And even still, it can only be harnessed by those of elven descent, so the party needs more firepower. They seek out the help of Klaus Lester, a man from old Euclid that is studying the power of summoning magic, their only real method of attack, since apparently Daos is immune to physical attacks, but that's never addressed in a gameplay sense, although it would be strange if your main character couldn't damage the main antagonist. Anyway, Klaus as a character acts as the older and more mature member of the party. At times the game treats him like a perverted and disgusting old man, even though the man is 29, which I have personal grievances with, but we all know if you're in a video game and you're pushing 30, you may as well be in the grave. He's quite forward as well, even to the point of almost arguing with the spirit of the Yggdrasil, telling her death is normal and she should get over it. There's also a little thing he has with his assistant Merald, who he leaves behind to help his students while the party does their thing. He's very obviously a core part of the journey, and a large reason for the party's reasons for acting and going where they do is in order to collect the various summons, and he's probably my second favourite character, shortly followed by the next one we find. While going to find the first summon spirit, we speak to a man who wants us to find his daughter, Arch. The next village over has been absolutely decimated by one of Daos' minions, and we find an orphan who is definitely not Arch. Don't worry that she looks identical to that party member character from the opening, it's definitely not Arch. Anyway, after the next dungeon, turns out it was Arch, just that she let the spirit of her friend Derris-Kharlan take over her body in order to enact revenge. Which makes sense, I guess. Arch is so kind. Arch, as mentioned before, is the party's mage, as she is a half-elf, and after gaining her, I wondered why getting Klaus was seen as our last resort for beating Daos. But then I remembered that every single elf is secluded in a mere forest, and most half-elves are persecuted by the wider world, so it wasn't likely we would run into one. Arch is a bit of a fluke. She's your typical bubbly, always excited character. She doesn't hold back at all, but most of what she says is layered with humour or sarcasm. She does go a bit too far at times, such as later on when she says Chester's weak, although she does apologise for that later, and is she wrong? My main issue with Arch is not even an issue with Arch herself most of the time, more with how the world treats her. Let me start by saying that she is 17, and a lot of the jokes directed towards her can be quite adult in nature. There's a scene on a boat early in the plot when Klaus discusses the girls, and then Arch is shown to have a rather suggestive dream after drinking. And then of course there's the hot springs scenes later on, which is an entire issue in itself. We need to move on from hot spring scenes. Society does not have any need for any more hot spring scenes. I feel like it just distracts from her actual character. I much prefer her when she's being herself, like the funny self we can see during skits. She can also have emotional scenes as well, like we see in Heimdall later on in the game. I'm going to mention the last party member here, even though she doesn't show up until much later in the game, and that is Suzu Fujibayashi. She is a ninja from the aptly named Ninja Village, and joins the party after a side quest involving finding and promptly defeating her brainwashed parents in battle. She's actually a new addition to the PS1 port of the game, being an NPC on the SNES. I never personally used her in battle, but she makes use of various ninja skills which must be purchased from various ninja NPCs you can find throughout the world, such as in places where summon spirits were previously fought, or even in this random room full of lava in an endgame dungeon. From what I can see, she's actually completely busted, and has the potential to be better than both Klaus and Arch, so maybe I should have given her the time of day. In terms of her personality, there's unfortunately not much to say. She lives her life by the way of the ninja, meaning she lives without emotion, so most things she says are cold and simple, and due to her status as an optional character, she doesn't really contribute much to the main plot, and there are several times where it's obvious that the scene was planned out without her present, with her stood awkwardly to the side the whole time. The further remakes and ports may have worked her character better, but that's not what we're talking about here. Now, you might be thinking, Fujibayashi? You mean like Sheena Fujibayashi, the ninja character from Tales of Symphonia? Well, yes. At this point I've brought up Symphonia a few times, and that is because in canon, Tales of Symphonia is a long, distant prequel to Phantasia, which explains the various similarities and references between the two. Yggdrasil, Martel, Argent's Grove and the Ymir Forest, the Ymir Forest itself, and there's even a book in one of the libraries that mentions the twin moons Silverant and Tetheala. Obviously this was lore established with the release of Symphonia, but I still wanted to mention it as something cool that relates to two entries. Anyway, back to Phantasia. At this point of the game, our objective becomes to seek out Luna, since she is the most powerful summon spirit Klaus knows about, although first we need to find the corresponding pact ring. Each summon needs a specific ring, and this made me think there will be times where we could possibly come across a summon without having the correct ring, but no. Every storyline summon we will obtain the ring before even getting to the area the summon is in. This is only really a concern for optional summons later, and even then, if you're aware of where they are, you'll probably know where the rings are too. Eventually the party meets up with Edward D. Morrison, the ancestor of Trinix that I mentioned before, and here again, Cress does something I didn't like. He shows Morrison the book they were given in the present day. Why Cress thought this was a good idea, I'm not sure, but I guess at this point I've made it clear I don't think Cress has had a good idea in his life. Although we shouldn't really fault him for attempting to change the timeline like this right now, since later Morrison will do this via his own actions. Although whether Cress's decision had any impact on his sacrifice is unclear, although in my personal opinion, Morrison discovering his descendant mastered time travel arts that he himself was studying made him trust much more in these mysterious travelers that he just met. Later on, after gaining Luna, we move into Midgard. No, not that one. This is the Norse one. Here is where the game starts to tease the player with the plot a little more. After looking around the massive city in the midst of evacuation and speaking to the military about their magitech technology, Arch expresses her confusion about Daos' methods. Why has he ignored the majority of the world's major cities and only attacked Midgard and Hamel, the village where we find Arch hours before? I think these are important questions to ask, as any insight into the enemy's thought process could help us understand their future moves, but Cress reads Arch's curiosity as sympathy, lashing out at her in yet another moment of poor judgment. After speaking to Arch's father, the only link the party comes up with is that Rhea's parents, who lived in Hamel, worked on the magitech technology in Midgard. However, after this we have Morrison's sacrifice as soon as we return to the city, and Cress shuts down any further discussion of Daos' intentions, which leads to the main antagonist not being discussed by the party beyond "we need to kill this guy," which led to Daos not being fleshed out beyond big evil man until the very end of the game. I also absolutely feel the need to mention the absolutely horrific section that takes place next here on the Valhalla Plains. The party must move through these small corridor-like sections while either fighting or attempting to dodge the demons on screen, all while being timed and having a reward tied to the amount of time it takes the player to reach the boss and defeat them. A boss which you are given no hint to a location, and you just have to wander until you find it. Thankfully this section is immediately followed up by another unique section, in which Cress gains a Pegasus and fights demons in the sky alongside Arch, and it didn't control as badly as I expected it to. Unfortunately, you will lose what is most likely your most powerful weapon for Cress straight after this, but at least you get to enjoy the only 2 anime cutscenes in the game before that. Speaking of, these slightly horrifying scenes are the main mention of the magitech weapons that we get. The giant cannon wipes out an insane amount of the flying demons, reducing them to bones. But a little scene of Martel lets us know that without any doubt, this technology is what's draining the world's mana, although thankfully the cannon is destroyed after attempting another blast. Unfortunately, the character in charge of the cannon, Ryzen, disappears after these events, meaning there's never any pushback or questioning of his methods after the fact, something I feel could have added a little extra depth to the events. Yet another scene I wish was expanded on is the dialogue with Daos just before the boss fight in his castle. The party approaches him and he lets them know he has no reason to fight them, only attacking when he assumes the party must be pawns of Midgard, leading the player to wonder, why is he so intent on only destroying certain cities and not just wiping out humanity entirely? And this is the last time we mention Daos' intentions and motive until after the final boss, which is a horrible time to get into that, but we'll mention it later. Also, this fight is insane in the PS1 version. From what I've seen, it can be really simple on the original Super Nintendo, but here you can cast Dao's Laser, an extremely powerful attack with little to no cooldown between casts, which ended my party's entire career at one point. This brings us to what the game almost appears to have forgotten about, restoring the Yggdrasil. The game doesn't tell you exactly where to go, only giving you vague hints via minced memories and a conversation on a boat, although the addition of a new NPC standing around in Midgard that you need to speak to might help, since if you remember the town layout, they'll stick out like a sore thumb. After saving the tree and magic forever, the party travels back to the present, using the actually really cool ruined city of Thor, a futuristic city found on the bottom of the ocean that has this weird common key puzzle that I will never attempt to understand, simply hate from afar. After returning to the present and saving Morrison and Chester, the party assumes Daos is dead and prepares to return home, only for a soldier from the future to seek their help from Daos. So the party moves 50 years into the future, with Chester in tow this time, giving us yet another world to explore. Although the Daos in the future is the same one as in the past, but not the same one as the present, since that one was actually killed in the collapse of the catacombs. The timeline has been affected by the death of Morrison and all that. It's all very confusing, and it's not explained in game that I'm aware of. I think it's important to mention at this stage, you cannot travel freely between time periods, so you'd need to finish up anything you have to do in the past, but there's nothing really exciting back there honestly. The majority of the optional stuff takes place in the future, including the Ninja Village and Suzu. The world map music changes here from one complete bop to another, and here is as good a place as any to talk about the music. My relationship with the music is complicated. In my honest opinion, all of the battle music is really good. There's a reason why the normal battle theme is referenced so much in later entries. Any battle with Daos has a theme that grabbed my attention immediately and definitely helped to keep up the tension throughout the fight, especially the final boss themes. But it's not like those fights needed the extra tension since I got my ass beat every single time. The world map themes of each three eras are good, but otherwise, the dungeon themes can be a bit hit or miss for me personally. Areas like Daos' Castle, the Cave of Burning Sands and the Limestone Cave have great music tracks that each match and contribute to the identity of each area, while also being nice to listen to. However, then we come across an area like the Tower of Flames. This place has music that is loud, chaotic, honestly overstimulating at times. It might match the energy of an ancient tower filled with lava, but dear god, it was horrible when you left a battle and had that disgusting tune re-enter your ears. It felt like gremlins were poking sticks around in my brain. Fun fact actually, Motoi Sakuraba, one of the composers, actually went on to compose tracks for the Dark Souls trilogy, Eternal Sonata, and the Mario Golf and Tennis series. What an interesting portfolio. At this stage, the party's goal is to collect the 3 treasures in order to form the Eternal Sword, which can manipulate time and space. Thankfully, we already have one of them at this stage, since I don't think you can actually miss the Diamond Ring, since you get it during the first visit to Thor, which leaves the 2 elemental swords, which you can get in any order. The second and last time story events can be tackled in any order. Both dungeons are similar in difficulty this time, although they are both filled with rooms that have damaging floors, and the random encounters can drop accessories which negate that damage for the other dungeon. For example, in the Tower of Flames, the enemies drop fire charms, which will negate ice damage from the Fenrir Cathedral, although you could just swap their affinities with a room bottle, so it's kind of a non-issue if you have those. I despise these damaging floors. They drain through your health far too quickly in my opinion, and it was even worse during the Sylph segment at the beginning of the game, since you have even less access to healing back then, with Mint having 1, maybe 2 spells. At least here at the end you have Nurse and Resurrection. After getting the 2 swords and getting Origin to fuse them all together, you get one more opportunity to clear up any optional content before the final dungeon. The main thing is obviously the Suzu quest, which makes you find her on a random screen in the middle of the tree and forest, and then fight in the Colosseum, which honestly isn't too difficult unless a random enemy paralyzes you, making you lose instantly. The Moria mines have also been extended, adding extra floors and allowing access to new summons. However, you'll have to do the entire thing twice if you want to get the final optional summon, which I did not do because I do not hate myself enough to do that. There's also Ifrit's treasure hunt, which has 22 items hidden throughout the world, completely hidden from sight, and only vague hints leading towards them, another thing I do not do. Honestly, I appreciate side quests like this being present in a game for people that like them, but personally I don't want to spend hours grinding to attempt to survive in a super dungeon or go pixel hunting for treasure. This is why I still haven't got all the celestial weapons in Final Fantasy X, even though it's one of my favourite games. Also, you can get Shadow from a cave outside early, but you'd have to do the Moria and Ifrit quests first, so is it really worth it? As a final dungeon, Daos' castle does its job really well in my opinion. The start is cold and metallic, just after you pull it out of a rift in the space-time continuum, and this section contains my only real issue with it. There's a section where if you step on a certain platform, then any of your party members that aren't wearing a certain accessory get teleported to the jail cells from the beginning of the dungeon. But you have to get your first Derris emblem from an easily missed NPC in early, and even then, the description doesn't let you know that's what you need for this. Once you know, it makes sense, but I couldn't figure it out myself. It's obviously not the most complicated concept. Obviously, the weird thing that doesn't affect your stats, and is literally named after Derris-Kharlan, has something to do with the strange magic man we're chasing. But Daos doesn't even mention that place until you're literally one phase into the final boss. Although, if that's my main complaint, then the rest of it must obviously be great. The second section of the dungeon gets a little more abstract in design, with purple tinted floors covered in stars, stone pillars on the walls. The design gets more intricate as you move towards the end, and the inner sanctum with this lovely outer area with magic transparent platforms forming as the party moves across. There's also a random blood fountain in the last few screens, and there's never anything like this ever again in the whole game, and it even damages you as you walk across it. The final encounter with Daos happens in the deepest part of the castle, and there's a few things I want to mention here. First of all, I think this is absolutely my favourite room in the entire game. The staircase past the intricate statues leading up to the viewing platform, looking down on the world and both of its twin moons. The atmosphere here is so powerful. It really makes it clear that this is the end and you are at the apex of the known world. Only Mint actually makes an effort to communicate with the man who raised an army of demons, and he makes it clear his only real enemy is Magitek. And Klaus makes a point that mana was already drying up before the mana cannon was fired, which honestly I don't remember that being mentioned, so I think he was making stuff up in order to gain the moral high ground. Sure, Daos had extreme methods, destroying entire cities in order to eliminate Magitek, but honestly, I don't know if any other method would have worked. A diplomatic solution may have taken far too long, or possibly never worked. Not that Daos was justified in what he did, but I understand why he went to extremes in order to protect the tree for reasons that we still don't know. With this we enter the final boss, and it's a difficult one, although probably my favourite fight. When I finally cleared it, of course. The first phase is almost identical to the previous two Daos fights, but everything changes in the cutscene after. Daos increases his power level by an insane amount, invoking the name of Derris-Kharlan, which turns out is his home planet, and Daos transforms into a horrific creature, known as Feather Daos or Phaser Daos in later versions, which is incredibly difficult to fight. It can phase out of existence to dodge all attacks, shoots homing balls of energy and long bullets that seem to move just a little too fast, and it can push Crest right back into the rest of the party, meaning he can't even attempt to stun the boss most of the time. As much as it employs annoying techniques at times, it is extremely satisfying to finally defeat. It also has 130,000 health, so that fight will be taking a while. After this, in some versions, that would be it. The game will be over. But in the PS1 version, there's a third phase to deal with. Daos yet again invokes the power of the gods of Derris-Kharlan, mentioning the Great Harvest, which we will find out about in the final cutscene. This final phase is even more powerful than the last, making quick work of an underprepared party. He's also immune to chronoglasses, which honestly I don't know why I even bothered trying an item which stops time on the being that can easily travel across time. After the fight, we finally get the truth explained, although it happens off screen and the party discusses it afterwards. At the base of the Yggdrasil, we find out that Daos was waiting for the Great Harvest, an event in which the mana tree will accumulate a large amount of mana, leading to a seed being produced which can grow a new mana tree. Turns out Derris-Kharlan had run out of mana due to magitech being used there, so Taos was trying to save the 1 billion people on its homeland by restoring the flow of mana, since people there can't live without it, unlike in the Phantasia home planet due to events that happen in a sequel game that I have not yet played. So in the end, he was trying to save the world's mana, although it was for his own goals, meaning his goal wasn't too different from the party's. Both simply wanted to save their own people. I appreciate the game's angle here of revealing this information after all is said and done. The fact that you've killed a man who simply wanted his people to not suffer. Although his methods may have not been great for a large number of innocent people, what he wanted was not evil in itself. This also explains why he was only targeting certain settlements, since they were the places involved in the development of the magitech technology. Thankfully, in the end, his efforts were not in vain, as Martel uses his corpse to form the mana seed, sending it across the cosmos. I would have liked some of that explanation to have happened before, maybe a mention of the Great Harvest during the Valhalla War section or something, not leaving it all until after the entire game is said and done. The scenes of the party going their separate ways is also quite touching, although since this is about the second scene in which Suzu has any meaningful dialogue, that kinda takes away from the emotion of her part a little. And even in the end, Klaus is the only one that will actually never see anyone else again. Since Arch is a half-elf, she will see the others, although it will be 100 years of waiting. And this leads us directly into the credits, ending a game I actually really did enjoy. I may have had my issues with it, such as with certain dungeon elements being too long or obtuse, and some of the music quite literally giving me a psychotic episode, but overall I had a great time. The combat was fun when it worked, I really enjoyed the characters mostly, and I loved the unraveling of the story, even though I would have preferred some of it to happen in a different order. And here is a section where any random things that I want to talk about and I couldn't find another part for them to go. There's a side quest in the past starting in Euclid with a couple named Nancy and Elvin. You get to help them get together and progress their relationship as you naturally progress the story, eventually ending in a wedding ceremony with Mint getting a title and some great clubs. Speaking of, titles are in this game. They're purely decorational, just marking your achievements, and you can get them for lots of things like leveling up, racing against children and winning, and getting new spells. The majority of them are fine, but some are questionable at best. There's a minigame in Daos's castle in the past, in which you have to step on some floor tiles at the same time as Arch, and this is honestly the worst thing I've ever seen in a video game. She runs in such a strange pattern, there's very little room for error and it's incredibly quick. Even if you get 1 or 2, it doesn't matter unless you get them all. Thankfully, if you take too many attempts, Klaus and Mint will complete it for you, and there's literally no reward for completing it yourself, so I wouldn't even bother trying. The game even tells you to run across the tiles and hope for the best, so what hope do I, a lone man who is bad at video games, have? There's a fairy named Artemis at the top of Luna's tower. He's named as the last fairy, but fairies are literally never mentioned anywhere else. What's going on here? Also, in order to meet Morrison in the past, you need to collect 5 basilisk scales, which are drops from rare enemies which are not guaranteed, and this took me 45 minutes to clear. Please remember, dark bottles exist for a reason. There's a remake of this game for the PSP, known as Tales of Phantasia Cross Edition, and there's another playable character available, meaning this version of the game has more female playable characters than male, which is always great to see. There's a random stealth section in Alvanista Castle, which is horrible, doesn't work. One of the guards can see you from off screen, the game doesn't tell you which direction you need to go in. It's only 1 screen long, but this did not need to be here. Morrison has a descendant in the future who admits that he doesn't have the courage or aptitude to fight, and so only offers advice and refuses to tell the party what their fate is in the end, which is a better view of affecting the timeline than literally anyone else in the game has, and I respect him for that. There's a pianist in Alvanista Bar called Sakuraba, named after the main composer of the game, and he'll play a little piano for you if you ask him. It's pretty neat. And finally, the GBA version adds a few extra side quests, including expanding on the hatred for half-elves in Heimdall, while also expanding on Suzu's character in a scenario similar to the Pagoda with Yuffie in Final Fantasy VII. I haven't played these myself, but give them a try if you want a little expansion on the game. As I said before, this was a game I did enjoy. Probably not as much as other games I've played in the series, but still, I had a great time with it. It has its issues, but what doesn't? Although certain issues are something I will find it hard to look past, I can still have a great time with it. I think if I was ever to play it again, I would definitely make an effort to try out Chester and Suzu a little more. Maybe actually delve to the bottom of the longer than necessary optional dungeon, but I think I'll leave that one for a while. If I had to give this game a rank, it'd probably be a B. And that's that on Tales of Phantasia. Hopefully this one felt actually more like a review this time. If you enjoyed, please make sure to leave a like or subscribe for more, it would really help me out. And with that, I will see you next time. Thank you and good night.